discussions between the two speakers, and we're going to put them now face to face. So I'm going to ask Hamza and Michael if you could push your chairs a little bit further out so you can see each other as well as the audience. Obviously, during the discussion, in this part of the discussion, what we are going to do is we're going to obviously in their speech, both of their introductions, certain themes came as common and certain points. So I'm going to put those questions, some of those themes, to the two speakers. And we'll start with Hamza because he started speaking. Hamza, you started talking about does God exist or not, but what we're trying to talk about is God or is believing in God relevant in today's life? So is he relevant?
Well, that's not the question today at all.
Yes, it is. I mean, the topic is God, delusion or solution.
Yeah.
And is God providing us, is believing in God a solution to our daily lives?
That's a good point, but in fairness, my brief and the gentleman's brief was today's topic about the existence of God. Hence, the God Delusion is a title of Richard Dawkins' book. But I'm going to address your question anyway. Okay. But it's a smart move to try and trap me in the corner. See, I think God is very relevant because if you have good reasons to believe in something, then the truth of the matter actually makes it really relevant into your life. This is why I think some of the claims that my fellow interlocutor was suggesting were straw men. There were straw men. He was building a straw man, and it's easy to defeat that straw man by a little bit of wind or a quick fire or something. And the reason I'm saying that is because take God's intervention as an example. I think Michael comes from a very Christian narrative, whereas in the Islamic tradition, I'm a Muslim, we believe that God uses physical causes in the universe to intervene. So whatever he said about intervention doesn't really negate the fact that God intervenes. Now, just because you don't understand or you find it really difficult, like the howness or the whyness of how God does something, it doesn't negate his existence. Most of your presentation was logically posterior to the existence of God. He actually assumes God's existence in the face as well. We could discuss about morality all day. We could discuss about why does God do certain things. But the argument today is more about ontology, not epistemology. Because one of the claims, very interesting claims that Michael was saying was, you haven't described the attributes of God, you've just said that a cause exists. Well, that's not very true. There was a whole section of my presentation that discussed conceptual analysis. And upon conceptual analysis, we get the basic definition of a monotheistic God. So we discussed it must be one, it must be uncaused, therefore eternal, must be immaterial, and must have a will, because they had a choice. And we discussed this via the conceptual analysis approach. Now, just to claim that I've said there's only a cause is an unfair analysis of my presentation, and one rather that you probably weren't very attentive to. Maybe you're drinking some water at that time, I don't know. But so, with regards to God's relevancy, if you have good reasons to believe in a creator, and I think I've given very cogent arguments, none of the arguments that Michael portrayed were philosophical undercutting defeaters, which basically means they actually damage the premises of my argument. For example, the fine-tuning claim, well, there's lots of places in the universe and the earth that are not fine-tuned. I agree, but how does that mean that there isn't a place that is fine-tuned? Do you see the trick of language here? Just because I can't live in Pluto, it doesn't mean I can't live in Ireland. Or some parts of Ireland anyway. Yeah? So the point is, that's another trick, kind of almost sophistry, if you like, to use language to try and undermine an argument. But if you really scratch the surface, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't negate the fact that there is fine-tuning, do you see? So I think if you've got good reasons...
So does believing in God helps you deal with social problems, depression...
Okay, that's a different question. Now, if you question it that way, that's different.
That's the whole point. I mean, look at...
Well, that's your whole point.
Look at the life around you. Exactly. That's the whole point of this debate. God, delusion or solution.
Yep.
Should we believe in God, and will that belief help us improve as human beings?
Okay, that's very good.
Society?
Well, I think me and Michael...
I'm gonna pass on.
Oh, you don't want me to answer that question now, no?
You can come back to that.
Okay, good.
Okay, Michael, you say God does not exist. So what you're saying is believing in God it will not help you becoming a better individual. It's, on the contrary, is going to help you or make you a worse individual. So societies and human beings are better off not believing in God and just act upon reason and secularism and all those kind of principles.
Yeah, the way that I would phrase it is that without religion, good people will continue to do good things, bad people will continue to do bad things. I know that's an oversimplification, but for the sake of the argument, we look at it that way. With religion, you get an extra added dimension. And it's not solely religion that adds this dimension. Things like nationalism, communism, and any ideology can add this extra dimension. That it can enable good people to do bad things and justify to themselves that they're doing bad things on the basis of the ideology, whether that ideology be religious or nationalist or communist or any dogma that moves people away from recognising that right and wrong are ultimately about how we treat each other and how we treat other sentient beings. So I would say that that religion doesn't cause people to be good or cause people to be bad, that what it is it is a distraction from, or can be in circumstances, a distraction from enabling us to work out together how best to live together by asserting that that question has already been answered 700 years ago, 1400 years ago, 2000 years ago, whatever it is, based on your religion, because somebody wrote something down then.
Okay. Can I
So
just...
I'll ask you the question, but I have a different question for you. So your point is good people will do good things, bad people will do bad things, but who defines good and bad? I'll come back to you on that.
Okay.
What would be your answer to the question that I asked you?
I'm going to answer that. Can I do that?
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Okay, see, this is very interesting. I have to admit, maybe pre-1960s, religious people had to shut their mouths. And like, okay, we're doing bad things, and people who don't believe in religion are quite good, and we're very bad, and oh my days. But I think now, if we study the sociology of religion, we will come to a conclusion. There's almost an academic consensus. And sociology, just to elaborate, actually discusses the effect of religion, not the underlying intellectual foundation. So it doesn't deal with rational thinking, right? It deals with the effect of. And when we probe the academic literature in the sociology of religion, we come to the certain conclusions, which are that religiosity, having a religion and practicing it, makes your life better, you're a more better person, in contrast to the atheistic view with regards to mental health, physical health, lower criminality, high levels of happiness, high levels of altruism and philanthropic activity. Let me give you some examples to take into consideration. In 2001, Schnittke in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion examined a data set of 3,000 adults from the general population. And he found that religious involvement had no significant relationship with depression. He also found that religiousness was a buffer against mental distress. Example number 2, in the Handbook of Religion and Health, edited by Harold Koenig, the authors reviewed 2,000 published experiments designed to test the relationship between religion and various medical conditions, etc., etc. The overall results were that religious people tend to live longer, have physically healthier lives. Significantly, younger people have lower levels of drug and alcohol abuse, criminal delinquency and attempted suicide. We could go on and on and on. For example, the Gallup survey on religion in America concluded that people who agreed that God was very important to them were twice as happy as those who did not believe in a God at all. I'll leave it to you to do your own research, but if, for example, we go to the Global Index of Philanthropy in 2007, it states, people are more charitable than non-religious. Religious people are more charitable regardless of various demographic variables. So we can come to the conclusion from a sociological perspective. It's a sociological question. It's not a philosophical question. That religious people are better people, generally. However, it doesn't mean people who are not religious are not good. Michael's a very good guy. I don't know why they're laughing.
Okay.
You know, but so the point I'm trying to say is, however though, if we see from an ideological, political level, religious people have done bad things. However, if we weigh the scale from broad, we take the helicopter approach and see what's going on, we would see there's been more deaths in the name of irreligious ideologies than anyone else. Even the political philosopher and general philosopher of Trinity, I had a debate with him on Tuesday, Professor Peter Simons, he agreed with me. He said, non-religious people have done worse things. And for example, 70 million people died under Chairman Mao. 20 million people under Stalin. 6 million of those were Christians. We don't have a memorial day every year for the 6 million Christians that were died in Russia, for example. 2 million people no longer exist because of Pol Pot. 700,000 innocent Iraqis in the current occupation. There were 500,000 innocent babies dying as a result of the 10-year sanctions with the Americans. A secular organization which doesn't have direct roots to religion was actually banning chemical treatment for cancer victims. Also, we have World War I and World War II, not done in the name of religion. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the point is, we need to move from the outdated cliche that religions cause death and destruction. It's a very Richard Dawkins kind of 7-year-old approach. If anyone reads his books, you would see that a lot of logical fallacies and historical inaccuracies. So, to answer your question, sociologically and politically, I think religion has a positive thing to say.
Okay, who decides what is good and bad?
Okay. Can I respond to that?
You can answer that as well.
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, in terms of who decides what's right and wrong, and good and bad, I would go at the moment with the thinking of Sam Harris, who has recently written a book called The Moral Landscape, which is addressing how science can evaluate right and wrong and good and bad. And his position, as I've outlined earlier, is that if you make the assumption, which I think is an assumption that most of us would intuitively make, that the worst possible of all worlds would be a world in which all sentient beings were suffering to the maximal extent for no reason, that every step away from that scenario is a step towards a good world, and every step towards that scenario is a step towards a bad world. And I should say better and worse rather than good and bad. And on that basis, we ourselves have to work out together how we move further away from that scenario by empathy, mutual respect, regardless of where we consider the foundation philosophically of the right and wrong to be. The task remains the same, to move away from that worst case scenario.
And who decides good and bad though?
We do it ourselves.
On what basis?
Well, I've given a potential basis there, which is that we're trying to move away from a situation where where all sentient beings are suffering to the maximal extent for no reason. You don't need to go below that. In the same way as we're here in the College of Surgeons, you don't need to go below why is it a good thing to be healthy. You just take that as a given. You don't say that people that don't want to be healthy, somehow.
What do you do if people in the West think that, for example, beheading is such a bad thing, and people in the Middle East think that beheading is a good thing because it prevents blah blah blah? So, how do you negotiate that difference?
Well, ideally, my personal preference is that you do it by reason and you do it non-violently. Unfortunately, other people take the approach that you do it by invading other countries and trying to make them do things your way. I think that the core of morality is respecting other individuals, and that you can't, therefore, although it may sound like paradox, you can't impose morality by force on people. Ultimately, you have to persuade people, as has been the case. Just generally, there's another survey, in fact, a series of surveys by a group called World Values Survey, which are an interdisciplinary team of social scientists and universities around the world who, for the last 15 years or so, have been investigating values around the world. And they're finding that about 70% of human values can be mapped onto two scales. If you look at it, think of it as an X and Y axis, that the X axis is individual values, which at one side of the scale is survival values, and are moving towards self-expression values as things become more positive. If you take the other side of the scale, the other axis, which is a societal axis, that first one is an individual axis. The societal axis is moving from traditional religious values towards secular rational values. And what they are finding is that throughout the world, to greater or lesser speeds, with the exception of Africa is the one exception to this, But throughout the world, at greater or lesser speeds, that individuals are moving from survival values towards self-expression values, and that the cumulative effect of all of these individuals in a society making that shift is moving societies away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. So to that extent, if you take that overview perspective of current sociological research, the move is happening anyway at greater or lesser speeds, depending on the different parts of the world. I'd like to just finish by responding to the point that Hamza made. I'm not suggesting that religion is the only contributory factor to harmful behaviour. In fact, I said in my original contribution that in the Q&A here that nationalism, communism, any dogma has the same effect. So I agree, yeah, those things are bad and they do cause bad. Equally, religion can have that effect. And what the underlying reason why a lot of religious people seem to have a lot of positive attributes in terms of their day-to-day life, I suspect is likely to be answered by the work that's going on in the positive psychology movement at the moment, which is a group of psychologists around the world who, for the last 10 years, have come together on the basis of saying, look, psychology has more or less been hijacked by an almost exclusive focus on depression and psychosis and neurosis and trying to bring people from -5 up to 0. And they're saying, that's really important, we need to keep doing that. But as well as doing that, we need to put the same amount of empirical research into optimism and hope and strength and resilience and the positive sides of bringing people from 0 up to +5. And in doing that research over the last decade, they're beginning to discover empirically the type of things that are important to human flourishing. And they turn out to be things like positive relationships with other people, absorption in activities that you can get involved in for their own sake rather than for external reward, and a sense of connection with something larger than yourself, which religious people will typically get out of religion and non-religious people may get out of some sort of philosophical position or being involved in some sort of activity to make the world a better place. So what I suspect is most likely to pan out to be the case is that religious people can have these needs fulfilled, these flourishing needs fulfilled through their involvement in religion. But that you can also have those needs fulfilled outside of religion and in a way that doesn't have the additional baggage of the harmful effects of religion. Because I think we all agree, if we're honest, that religion has positive effects and harmful effects. So if we can disentangle the positive effects of religion from the harmful effects of religion, that will bring us closer to the type of world that I think we would all like to see.
Hamza, okay, we've listened. There are so many other themes that I'd like to touch upon, but running out of time here. Does God is the Muslim God or Christian God? There's always mention of punishment. There's always mention of reward. So, what kind of a God? I mean, you're saying Muslims believe that God would punish, would send His punishment, His storm, tempest upon a people who disobey and disbelieve, and yet suffering continues, even upon people who believe in God. So what is the solution there? Why should people continue to believe in God?
There's lots of questions there, to be honest. I think the first and most important thing for us to understand is that... Can someone close that door, please? Can someone close that door, please? Sorry. Because this noise breeze coming from the east. Yeah? Okay, good. Essentially, what's very important for us to understand is that when we look at spiritual scripture, especially if we look at the Quran itself, it uses various strategies. One of the strategies it uses is a rational strategy to make you think and reflect upon life. The Quran is a very interesting book that scholars have described as an imposing book. And this imposing book is a positive thing because it positively wants to engage with the inner dimensions of man. It wants to engage with his aql, in Arabic, his intellect, and with his nafsiyah, his internal, emotional, psychological disposition. And the way the Quran does this, which is quite a unique book, it questions. For example, it says, do they not reflect within themselves? Have they not seen what God has created within the universe and reflect upon that and come to certain conclusions? For instance, one of the Arabic terms that the Quran uses is يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, which means those who reflect, which comes from the root word, which is used 18 times in the Quran, that the thing that you're reflecting upon, you must inquire about its implications. Don't be a desert romantic. Don't touch the sand and look at the stars. Rather, think about the implication of the object of reflection and meditation. So Quran has that strategy. Now, not everyone's going to follow that strategy because human beings are weak and human beings have this thing called arrogance. And the way the Quran breaks that arrogance, it says, look, there are metaphysical consequences to your actions. So, reward and punishment. And these are two themes, two distinct and core themes in the Quranic discourse that enables one to say, look, okay, let me reflect back on my position of life again. Because sometimes people forget about the reflection process and they need that wake-up call, if you like, to reflect that there is implications to our actions. And so this comes into the realm of moral philosophy, of moral motivation. See, from an atheist perspective, there is no moral motivation apart from doing good just for yourself. Now the question is, in religious discourse, specifically Islam, we have a moral motivation, which is accountability of the Day of Judgment. We don't believe we're going to be just worm buffet. We're not going to just die and that's it. We don't believe in nothingness and purposelessness. For example, postmodern philosophers such as Arthur Schopenhauer, he wrote essays on suicide because he wished he wasn't alive. He wished the world never existed. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, would write similar things on the world is based on nothingness. So the issue is, the logical conclusions of atheism is depression. This is why Bertrand Russell, he said, if we want to improve, we have to get to grips with this calamity of life that we're just here and we're going to finish. And that's the logical implications of atheism. For example, if you read the works of Dostoevsky, you see the Russians torturing and killing people. Because what do they say? We're not going to be accountable. We have the power. We have a Nietzsche type of philosophy of that. Whoever has the power has the right to dictate moral norms. And we're going to kill you and torture you and abuse you and rape. That's what happens in Uzbekistan under the pseudo-communist nation. People are injected with their AIDS virus. Political opponents are boiled to death. They don't have a metaphysical accountability. I'm not saying you need one to be good. But from a global consensus perspective, it's very useful. I'm going to be accountable on the Day of Judgment. Because if you think about it, we're all very selfish as human beings. We want what's best for us. So essentially, this metaphysical concept of accountability, reward and punishment are moral motivations to enable to do something. For example, the atheist position is quite bleak in my perspective. You can have a fulfilled life and maybe a happy life. But it's a baseless life, essentially. Because there's no ultimate meaning or value. Because does it matter if the universe ever existed? Our ends are the same. Does it matter if I was a devil or if Michael was an angel? It makes no real difference. Logically, rationally. We can't put some, I'm moral, I'm a nice atheist, happy-go-lucky, have your Guinness and think about existentialism all your life, yeah? But in reality, the implications of this worldview are serious. And Michael was talking about dogma, atheism, nationalism, etc. They cause bad things. Atheism is a dogma. Even in Michael's own words, it's a reaction to theism. That's a dogma to me. If you go to the Dictionary of Philosophy, what does it say about atheism? It says, a knowledge claim. Anything that has a knowledge claim creates a concept. It creates a concept, and a concept, like a basic concept like atheism, produces other ideas. This is why Richard Dawkins, what does he say in his book? He says, there is no good, there is no bad. Because there is no defining reference point for good or bad. It just is. And we're just here just to aid for survival and reproduction. We're here to propagate our DNA. That's the reality of the naturalist position. Or if you take the other position of the naturalist or the atheist, it's like it really doesn't have any meaning at all, so you create meaning for yourself. This is what the existentialists came to the conclusion, so you create a new realm of possibility for your own life. But that's a self-delusion. That's the real delusion. Attributing purpose to your life, but saying your underlying life, the reason for your existence, is purposeless. So, from the point of view of the strategy of the Quran, I think it's a very unique strategy that works. And the reason it works, we could see even in Irish history, when we had the potato famine. It was the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Caliphate, that actually wanted and intended to send resources and money to the Irish, but didn't send so much because he didn't undermine the Queen. So that was a religious state doing good things. You know, what do we have now? We send good things like resources and money only for political agendas. The Ottoman state had no political agenda with regards to the Irish. What were they going to get? Compost?
Okay.
So, no offense to the Irish, of course, yeah?
Okay, Michael, what's the moral motivation of atheism? Okay. Where do we end up after we die? What happens to, let's say, a pilot who is flying an Air Force jet, bombing people from hundreds of feet or thousands of feet up from above the sky, and he doesn't even see the people he's killing, and a suicide bomber who goes and blows himself up in the middle of a market? What's the difference?
In outcome?
From an atheist point of view. A person who lives all his life abiding law, respecting people, paying his taxes, blah, 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 and then a person who goes, lies, cheats, but he's the richest, continues to be the richest person. What's the difference between them? What's the moral motivation for an atheist?
Okay. Well, the moral motivation doesn't come from atheism per se. Your moral motivation comes from your sense of ethics, your sense of right and wrong. There are some atheists who are very bad people. There are some atheists who are very good people. All that atheism says is that whatever your source of morality, that it doesn't come from believing in gods. Atheism is, it's important to understand, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what atheism is. Atheism is not a dogma. Atheism is a response to the assertion by religious people that gods exist. And atheists are people who say, no, we don't believe that's true. We could be wrong. Most atheists that I know are quite happy to say, and most do say, that if there was evidence produced of a God, that we would go, right, okay, we were wrong. There is a God. It's the difference between the scientific method of analysing things here, I'll phrase it slightly differently. Hamza said earlier on, and relies in a lot of his discussions on, if we do some conceptual analysis, which is thinking really hard about it, and then comes to whatever conclusions, that therefore God must have a will. Therefore, whatever created the universe must have a will. You could just as easily say, therefore, it must be a banana. It doesn't follow from that. The way that you move forward in terms of understanding things is not simply conceptual analysis. It's observation of the real world. It's thinking what you think is going to happen, then comparing that by experiment to what actually happens in reality, and then basing your conclusions on matching what you think is reality to experiments about reality. And then having done that, what the difference between the scientific method and religious methods is that science tries to prove its theories wrong. Religion tries to prove its theories right. And that's what makes science much more reliable than religion, because you get brownie points in science for trying to disprove what people believe within the scientific community. In religion, if you do that, you get ostracised.
Can I respond to that?
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have to admit, Michael, your reading of philosophy is inaccurate. I mean, you need to read philosophy. Because you're saying that conceptual analysis is a religious tool. It's not. It's a rationalist tool. It's a tool under the philosophy of rationalism. Your tool that you're using is scientific naturalism, which I think is very crude. Because what the Muslim has done, for example, my presentation, I took rationalism, empiricism, scientific naturalism, morality, a whole corpus of methodologies to come to a conclusion. You're still sticking? Sorry. That's a Freudian slip, I do apologize. You're still sticking to a very crude scientific naturalist position. Because look, scientific naturalism or empiricism, if you want to go from a crude perspective, is quite self-defeating, because you're assuming that's the only method to form conclusions. And it's not, because scientific naturalism can't show you morality, and you've admitted that. It's only from your own sense of self. Scientific naturalism can't give you what's good or bad. Scientific naturalism can't prove rational, logical truths like numbers. And you need mathematics and logic and numbers to have science in the first place. Now, to argue science can prove that would be arguing in a circle. Also, scientific naturalism can't prove things like love and emotions. Now, you're not going to say to your wife, it's only a chemical reaction, love. You probably get a pint of Guinness on your head. Yeah. So the point is, we need to understand something very critical here. Atheists, they fall into a fallacy that the only way to form conclusions is by using scientific naturalism. For example, you can't do political moves in the political arena using scientific naturalism. But what the Muslim does, which I think is more, or even the theist, the Christian, whoever they are, is more enlightened. You know why? Because they have a whole corpus of methodologies they use and apply to varying realities. But you just stick it to crude scientific naturalism, which is it's a form of logical positivism that they had in the 1960s. They've moved away from that now, yeah? Like everything you say must be verified, which is verificationism.
We're running out of time.
Okay, that's fine.
Right. Do you want to respond to them?
Yeah, of course there are things to which science is best applied, which are trying to identify the nature of reality. There are other issues which, in terms of morality, which are things that we have to agree among ourselves. Whether you claim that your foundation for it is that you believe that a God said it, or whether you claim that it's something that's intuitive within us, or whether you claim that it's something objective but not created by a God. So you can't categorise atheists together and say that atheists believe ABC. The only thing that atheists share in common is that we don't believe that gods exist. Most atheists, because that's a position that you can reach rationally, most atheists are also rationalists. Most atheists are also secularist, in that if you don't believe that gods exist, you're unlikely to want to believe that society should be run on the basis of dictates of people saying that gods have said this. So that's the basis of the commonality of an atheist approach to the world, is that atheists don't believe that gods exist. Most atheists are rational, and most atheists are secularists. But beyond that, you can't draw any other conclusions about the nature of atheism, simply by virtue of the fact that we don't believe in a proposition put forward by other people about the existence of gods.
Okay.